So now let's look at this production function in more detail. Again, let's use the example of you studying for an exam that's tomorrow. So you have 24 hours for studying. Remember that you had two type of inputs. You have your fixed inputs, and let's concentrate on IQ, so that between now and tomorrow you cannot change your IQ. But the thing you can change is the number of hours you study. All right. So that for you will be your variable input. Call that the variable input. Okay? Number of hours studying. Okay. So let's say when you don't study anything, you won't be able to answer any correct problem. So that one is easy. Now let's say you study 1 hour. And you're very productive because 1 hour you just learning the material, you were able to gain a lot. Let's say you're able to answer 5 problems. Now, as you know, when you study for exams, I'm sure you deal with that a lot. The more hours you dedicate, yeah, you will get better, but every additional hour probably is not going to be as productive as the next hour. So that's what this production function is going to recreate. So let's say your 3rd hour, the number of 12. The fourth hour you study allow you to answer 2 more for 14, and the 5th hour you study allow you to answer 1 more to 15. Right? So I'm sure you deal with this every time you study for an exam. At some point you're going to say, well, it doesn't matter if I study any more hours. I've reached my limit. This is the best I can do to this exam. Yeah, you will probably be able to increase the number of correct problems if you increase the hours, but as you see here, every additional hour is increasing your correct problems by a lot less than the previous hour. The first hour allows you to answer 5 problems, so increase your number of correct problems by 5. The second hour, increase your number of correct problems by 4. The third hour, increase your number of correct problems by 3. The fourth hour by 2, and the 5th hour by 1. And this makes sense because you're working on a fixed input. You're working with an IQ that is already fixed. There's nothing you can do about it. Same with let's say, the amount of previous knowledge you have before coming into a class. And the only thing you can change is the variable input, but this variable input has to use its fixed input that is fixed. So over time, what's going to happen is that the variable input is going to give you all it can. And at some point, every additional hour, even though it increases your total number of output, is going to start to decrease. So economists call this diminishing marginal returns to an input. And it's usually the variable input, right? And we see this in any kind of situation. For instance, this could be the same way in which if you have a pizzeria, the same way you will see if you have the number of hours of work. And this could be, let's say, the number of pizzas you produce, right? And in this case, your fixed input was your oven, if you have a pizzeria, and your variable input was the number of workers you have or number of worker hours you have, right? So this will be worker hours. And the first worker you add, you only have 1 oven. The first worker allows you to increase your pizza by a lot. Now the second worker, yeah, you can actually start, the second worker worked at the cash register. The first worker was still making pizzas. So you can increase your output, but the second worker is not going to be as productive as the first worker because you only have 1 oven. Now when you add a third worker, now they start to get in the way of the other workers. And since you only have 1 oven, each additional worker is not going to increase your output, in this case your number of pizzas, by a lot. So we call this diminishing marginal returns to an input. And it's something that is just physical. See that there's no money here. It's just a matter of physics. When you increase a variable thing, in this case worker hours, or it could be the time of hours you dedicate to study, that need a fixed input, in this case an oven, but it could be your IQ, eventually the variable input is going to become less productive. Right? And we call this diminishing marginal returns to an input, in this case a variable input. So we can see this very easily, right, in this case. Or we can also see it in a graph. If you have a graph like this, where you put the amount of workers here, and then you put your number of pizzas here, so that will be your output here. You will actually see the same, a very interesting way of seeing the same pattern, right? So this will be the first worker, allows you to brought you, say you have, say you have 5 here, 10, right? And then you have 15 up here, right? So the first worker allows you to bring 5. When you have no workers, you produce nothing. The second worker allow you to produce 9, so it'll be around here. Now the third worker allow you to produce about 12, so you're around here. Fourth worker allow you to produce 14, right? So you're seeing what is happening is that this curve, if you connect all these dots, what you're seeing is a curve that kind of increasing. It's increasing. Your workers are bringing more output, but it's increasing at a decreasing rate. It's increasing at a decreasing rate, right? Right? Meaning that the change every time is actually getting smaller. That's what we have seen in the previous one, right? So this was here 5, 4, and so forth. So we call this curve, we call it the production function. Remember that? This is what happens in the square. What happens in the square is that every time you change a variable input, when one of the inputs is fixed, you're going to exhibit this increasing and decreasing rate, which is the diminishing marginal returns. And we call it diminishing marginal returns because the slope, or the change, every time you increase your worker, is going to be called the marginal. So this slope is going to be called the marginal product of whatever it is. In this case, it's going to be your workers, so we're going to call it the marginal product of labor. But if you were increasing anything else, it will be the marginal product of the variable input. All right. So this, as you remember, is going to be let's use the MPL for subscript. So MPL is going to be equal to, well, the way we calculate in this is going to be the change in output every time you change your labor. So when you're changing it one by one, the first worker brings you 5, the second worker 4, and so forth and so forth. Okay? So in the next mini lesson, we're going to see how this looks when we are combining both inputs at the same time.